Welcome to Lisvane Player's third radio play, a brand new adaptation of Kenneth Grahame's The Wind in the Willows. Written in 1908, the novel continues to delight each generation as one of our best-loved classics. So gather the family round and join us for this wonderful tale of friendship, mischief and adventure.
This evening's performance has been recorded in aid of Butte Park's appeal to save its Pumba earth sculpture. We'd love to see him restored to his former glory as a permanent fixture in the park, so please consider donating what you can via the link in the video description.
We hope you enjoy the show. Our dear friend Paul would have simply loved it. His presence among the players is very much missed, as are our friends and audiences, though we do hope to see you all again soon. But for now, let us join life on the riverbank.
The mole had been working very hard all morning, spring cleaning his home, first with brooms, then with dusters, upon ladders and steps, till he had dust in his throat, grit in his eyes, and splashes of whitewash all over his black fur.
Bother! Hang spring cleaning.
So he scraped and scratched and scrabbled and scrooged.
Up we go, up we go, up, 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 pop.
His snout came out into the sunlight, and he soon found himself rolling about in the warm grass of a great meadow.
This is fine. This is better than spring cleaning.
The sunshine struck hot on his fur as he pursued his way across the meadow to the edge of a full-fed river. Never in his life had he seen a river before.
Well, I never.
As he looked across, he noticed a dark hole in the bank opposite, just above the water's edge. Something bright and small seemed to twinkle down in the heart of it, but suddenly it vanished. Then it winked at him, and so declared itself to be an eye. A small face gradually grew up around it, a little brown face with whiskers. It was the water rat.
Hello, Mo.
Hello, Rat.
The rat lightly stepped into a small boat, painted blue on the outside, white within, just the size for two animals. He rowed steadily across the water and invited the mole to join him.
Do you know, I've never been in a boat before.
What? Never been in a... Well, what have you been doing then?
Is it really as nice as all that?
Nice? Believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. Simply messing
Look
about...
ahead, Rat.
It was too late. The boat struck the bank full tilt. Unfazed, the rat climbed up into his hole and after a short interval reappeared, staggering under the weight of a large wicker luncheon basket.
Here, shove this under your feet.
What's inside it?
There's cold chicken and cold tongue, cold ham, cold beef, pickled gherkins, salad, French rolls, crust sandwiches, potted meat, ginger beer, lemonade, soda water.
Stop! It's too much.
Do you really think so? It's only what I usually pack for these little excursions.
In no time the mole was thoroughly absorbed in this new way of life, intoxicated with the sparkle, the ripple, the scents and sounds.
So this is a river.
The river.
And you really live by the river?
By it, and with it, and on it, and in it. It's my world.
But isn't it a bit dull at times? No one else to pass a word with?
No, it isn't.
What lies over there?
That? Oh, that's just the wild wood. We don't go there very much as riverbankers.
Aren't there very nice people in there?
Well, let me see. The squirrels are all right. And the rabbits, some of them. But rabbits are a mixed lot. Then there's dear old Badger, of course. Nobody interferes with him. finally there's the weasels, stoats, ferrets, the wild wooders. Sometimes, well, there's no denying it, you can't really trust them, and that's a fact. Beyond the wild wood comes the wide world. But no more of that. Now then, here's our backwater, lunch at last.
He brought the boat alongside the bank and helped the awkward mole safely ashore, scooping up the luncheon basket. The mole begged to be allowed to unpack it all by himself. The rat was very pleased to indulge his excited friend, who shook out the tablecloth and spread it on the ground, then took out all the mysterious packets, one by one.
Oh, my! Oh, my!
Now pitch in, old fellow.
Within short measure, an otter hauled himself out of the river and shook the water from his coat.
Greedy beggars! Why didn't you invite me along, Ratty?
Oh, an impromptu affair. By the way, my friend Mr. Mole.
Proud, I'm sure. All the world seems to be out in the river today. Such a rumpus everywhere. Toad's out for one, in his brand new wager boat, new togs and everything.
Once it was nothing but sailing with Toad, until he tired of that and took to punting. Then last year it was houseboating. He was going to spend the rest of his life on a houseboat. But it's always the same. Whatever he takes up, he gets tired of it and starts on something new.
Such a good fellow, but no stability, especially in a boat. Alas, good day to you both. My regards to Badger Ratty.
And with that, the otter was gone.
Well, I suppose we ought to be moving. I wonder which of us had better pack the luncheon basket.
Oh, please let me.
Packing the basket was not quite so pleasant as unpacking the basket. It never is, but the mole was bent on enjoying everything. The afternoon sun began to fade as the rat rode gently homewards, murmuring poetry to himself.
A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye. There is a star when only one is shining in the sky.
And not paying too much attention to the mole, who remained spellbound by their surroundings. Both were so very full of lunch. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlour and enthralled the mole with more river stories until supper time. Stories about weirs, sudden floods, leaping pike, night fishing with the otter, and excursions far afield with Mr. Badger. Supper was a most cheerful meal, but shortly afterwards, a terribly sleepy mole had to be escorted upstairs by his considerate host to the guest room, where he laid his head on the pillow and fell soundly asleep.
Ratty,
Said the mole suddenly one bright summer's morning.
if you please, I want to ask a favour of you. Won't you take me to call on Mr. Toad?
Why, certainly. We'll get the boat out and paddle up there at once. It's never the wrong time to call on Toad. He's always the same fellow.
He must be a very nice animal.
The mole got into the boat and took the oars, whilst the rat settled himself comfortably in the stern.
He is indeed the best of animals. So simple, so good-natured, and so affectionate. Perhaps he's not very clever. We can't all be geniuses. And it may be that he is often boastful and conceited. But he has got some great qualities, has Toady.
Rounding a bend in the river, they came in sight of a handsome, dignified old house of mellowed red brick.
There's Toad Hall. Toad is rather rich, you know, and this is really one of the nicest houses in these parts, though we'd never admit as much to Toad.
They disembarked and strolled across the flower-decked lawn to find the toad resting in a wicker chair with a large map spread out on his knees.
Hooray! Oh, this is most splendid!
He shook their paws warmly, never waiting for an introduction to the mole.
Now, what will you take? Come inside and have something.
Oh, let's sit quiet a bit, Toady.
Delightful residence, Mr. Toad.
Finest house on the whole river, or anyone else for that matter. Now look here. You're the very animals I wanted. You've got to help me.
It's about your rowing, I suppose. You really must be...
Boating? Silly boyish amusement. Oh, I've given that up long ago. Sheer waste of time, that's what it is. No, I've discovered the real thing, the only genuine occupation for a lifetime. Come with me, just as far as the stable yard, and you shall see what you shall see.
Drawn out of the coach house, they saw a sparkling gypsy caravan, painted a canary yellow with green and red wheels.
There you are. There's real life for you, embodied in that little cart. The open road, the dusty highway, the heath, the hedgerows, the rolling downs, here today, up and off to somewhere else tomorrow. Oh, come inside and look at the arrangements. Planned them all myself.
The mole was tremendously interested
oh.
and eagerly followed him up the steps and into the caravan. The rat only snorted and thrust his hands deep into his pockets, remaining where he was. It was indeed very compact and comfortable inside. Little sleeping bunks, bookshelves, a cooking stove with pots, pans, jugs, and kettles of every size and variety.
All complete. You see, biscuits, spotted lobster, sardines, bacon, jam, cards, and dominoes. All ready for when we make our start this afternoon.
I beg your pardon? We? Start? This afternoon?
Oh, now, dear good old Ratty. Don't begin talking in that stiff and sniffy sort of way, because you know you've got to come. I can't possibly manage without you. Surely you don't mean to stick to your dull, fusty old river all your life, do you? Just live in a hole in a bank and vote? I want to show you the world.
I don't care for the world. I'm not coming, and that's final. And what's more, my Mole is going to stick with me and do as I do, aren't you, Mole?
Of course I am. All the same, it sounds as if it might be, well, rather fun.
The rat wavered. He hated disappointing people. He was so fond of the mole and would do almost anything to oblige him. Meanwhile, the toad watched them both closely.
Come along in and have some lunch. We'll talk it over. We needn't decide anything in a hurry.
During luncheon, which was excellent, of course, the toad simply let himself go. Disregarding the rat and playing upon the naive mole, he painted the prospects of the trip and the joys of the open road. Somehow, it soon seemed taken for granted that the trip would go ahead. So the horse was harnessed, and they were soon on their way. Late in the evening, tired but happy, and many miles from home, they drew up on a remote common, turned the horse loose to graze, and ate their simple supper sitting on the ground beside the cart. The toad talked big about all the things they would do tomorrow, as the stars grew large all around them, and the yellow moon came out to listen. At last, they turned into their little bunks.
Well, good night, you fellows. Oh, this is the real life for a gentleman.
The next morning, they strolled along the high road with the mole next to the horse and the rat and the toad following behind, when disaster, fleet and unforeseen, sprang upon them. It started as a faint warning hum, like the drone of a distant bee. Then, glancing behind them, they saw a small cloud of dust with a dark center of energy advancing on them. Hardly regarding it, they resumed their conversation, when in an instant it was upon them. Rang loud in their ears, and they caught a momentary glimpse of the magnificent motor car, with its driver hugging the steering wheel. Within a fraction of a second, it flung out an enveloping cloud of dust and dwindled to a speck in the far distance. The rat danced up and down in the road, simply transported with rage.
You villains! You scoundrels! You roadhogs! I'll have the law on you. I'll take you through the courts.
The toad sat straight down in the middle of the dusty old road, legs stretched out before him. He stared fixedly in the direction of the disappearing motor car and faintly murmured.
Poop, poop.
The mole was busy trying to quiet the horse, which he succeeded in doing after a time, as the rat recovered his own composure, turned to the toad, and shook him by the shoulders.
Poop, poop.
Toady.
Oh, what a glorious, stirring sight. The poetry of motion. The real way to travel. The only way to travel. Oh, bliss. Oh, rapture. Oh, poop, poop.
Oh, stop being an ass, Toad.
Oh, to think I never knew. All those wasted years, I never even dreamt. Horrid little carts. Common carts. Canary-coloured carts.
What are we to do with him?
Nothing at all. Because there is nothing to be done, you see. I know him of old. He is now possessed. He'll continue like that for days, quite useless for all practical purposes.
But we can't just leave him here, in the middle of the road, in the state he's in.
Now look here, Toad. As soon as we get to the town, we'll have to go straight to the police station and see if they know anything about that motor car and who it belongs to, and lodge a complaint against them.
Police station? Complaint? Me? Complain? About that beautiful, that heavenly machine?
You see what it is, Moley. He's quite hopeless.
They proceeded to escort the spellbound toad home to his door and instructed his housekeeper to feed him and put him to bed. The following evening, the mole, who had risen late and taken things very easy all day, was sitting on the riverbank fishing when the rat came strolling along to find him.
Heard the news? There's nothing else being talked about all along the river. Toad went up to town by the early train and has ordered a large and very expensive motor car.
The mole had long wanted to make the acquaintance of Mr. Badger. He seemed, by all accounts, to be of such important personage. But whenever the mole mentioned his wish to the water rat, he always found himself being put off.
Oh, it's all right. Badger'll turn up some day or other.
Couldn't you invite him here to dinner or something?
He wouldn't come. Badger hates society. Invitations, dinner, and all that sort of thing.
Well then, supposing we were to call on him?
Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't like that at all.
As the season grew colder and the animals kept ever more inside, the mole found his thoughts dwelling again on the solitary Mr. Badger, who lived his own life by himself in the middle of the wild wood. Time and time again, the mole could not help but ask the same question of his companion until one day the rat relented and off they went. As so often happened when riverbank creatures ventured into the wild wood, the two friends soon found themselves not quite knowing where they were going or which way to turn. However, they were quite certain they had trodden the same path more than once, all the while conscious of the eyes, ever so often, peering up out of holes or down from branches at them. By the time the rat recognized a familiar route, it was beginning to get dark, and the snow, which had been falling for over an hour, was building up all around. When finally they reached Mr. Badger's green door, set deep in the undergrowth, the rat gave it a firm knock. And another. and several more, until at last the door opened a few inches, just enough to show a long snout and a pair of sleepy, blinking eyes.
Now, the very next time this happens, I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is it this time? Speak up.
Oh, please let us in, dear Badger. It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole. We've lost our way in the snow.
Why, Ratty, my dear old chap. Come along in, both of you, at once. You must be perished. Well, I never. Lost in the snow? And in the wild wood, too?
The Badger, who wore a long dressing gown and slippers, carried a flat candlestick in his paw and had probably been on his way to bed when their summons sounded.
This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out in.
The kindly Badger entreated them to rest in armchairs aside the fire. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, he summoned them to the table, where he'd laid a hearty meal.
Now then, tell me the news from your part of the world, Ratty. How's old Toad going on?
Oh, from bad to worse in this latest motor car. Another smash-up only last week. A bad one. He will insist on driving himself, but he's so hopelessly incapable.
How many has he had?
Smashers or machines? Really, it's the same thing. This is the 7th.
He's been in hospital 3 times. And as for the fines he's had to pay...
Toad's rich, we all know that, but he's not a millionaire. And he's a hopelessly bad driver, quite regardless of law and order. Oh, Badger, oughtn't we to try to do something?
When the winter is done, we'll take Toad seriously in hand. We'll stand no nonsense whatever. But now it's time we were all in bed. Come along, you two. I'll show you to your quarters, and take your time tomorrow morning. Breakfast at any hour, if you please.
In accordance with the Badger's instructions, the 2 tired animals came down to breakfast very late next morning to find 2 young hedgehogs sitting at the table, eating oatmeal porridge.
Where have you 2 youngsters come from? Lost your way in the snow?
Yes, sir. Me little Billy here. We were trying to find our way to school. Mother would have us go. But of course we lost ourselves, sir. Then we happened on Mr. Badger's back door and made so bold as to knock, sir. For Mr. Badger's a kind-hearted gentleman, as everybody knows.
I understand. What's the weather like outside?
Oh, terrible bad, sir. Terrible deep the snow is.
And where is Mr. Badger?
The master's gone into his study, sir, and said he was going to be particularly busy this morning, and on no account was he to be disturbed.
Indeed, they did not see Mr. Badger until long after luncheon, when they ventured into his study to find him dozing in his armchair, feet up under a blanket. The visitors heartily thanked and bade farewell to their host.
Come along, Mole. We must get off while it's daylight. Don't want to spend another night in the wild wood.
You really needn't fret, Ratty. My underground passages run further than you think, and I've bolt holes to the edge of the wood in several directions, though I don't care for everybody to know about them. You shall leave by one of my short cuts.
The Badger took up his lantern and led the way along a damp and airless tunnel that wound and dipped through solid rock for a weary distance that seemed to be miles. At last, daylight began to show through the tangled growth overhanging the mouth of the passage. The Badger, bidding them a hasty goodbye, hurriedly pushed them out through the opening and retreated. Pausing for a moment and looking back, They saw the whole mass of the wild wood, dense and menacing, set in vast white surroundings. Simultaneously, they shivered, turned, and made swiftly for home.
It was a bright spring morning. The mole and the water rat, who had both been up since dawn, very busy on matters connected with boats, were finishing breakfast in their little parlour, eagerly discussing their plans for the day, when a heavy knock sounded at the door.
See who it is, Mole, like a good chap, since you've finished.
Mr. Badger.
The hour has come.
Oh, what hour?
Whose hour, you should say? Why, Toad's hour, the hour of Toad. I said I would take him in hand as soon as the winter was over, and I'm going to take him in hand today.
Of course. We'll teach him to be a sensible Toad.
This very morning, another new and exceptionally powerful motor car will arrive at Toad Hall. You two animals will accompany me instantly, and the work of rescue shall begin.
Right you are. We'll convert him. He'll be the most converted Toad there ever was before we've done with him.
They set off on their mission of mercy, Badger leading the way. When they reached the carriage drive of Toad Hall, they found, as the Badger had anticipated, a shiny new motor car of great size and painted bright red. As they neared the entrance, the door was flung open, and Toad, arrayed in goggles, cap, gaiters, and enormous overcoat, came swaggering down the steps, drawing on his racing gloves.
Hello, you fellows. You're just in time to come with me for a jolly ride.
Take him back inside.
As the Toad was hustled back into the house, struggling and protesting,
Oh, unhandle me, unhand me.
the Badger turned to the chauffeur in charge of the new motor car.
I'm afraid you won't be needed today. Mr. Toad has changed his mind. He will not require the car, thank you. Now then, Toad, first of all, you could take those ridiculous things off.
I shan't. What is the meaning of this gross outrage?
You knew it must come to this sooner or later, Toad. You've disregarded all the warnings we've given you. You've gone on squandering the money your father left you, and you're getting us animals a bad name in the district with your furious driving, your smashes, and your rows with the police. Now, you will come with me into the smoking room, where you will hear some facts about yourself, and we'll see whether you came out the same Toad as you went in.
After some 3/4 of an hour, the Badger reappeared, solemnly leading by the paw a very limp and dejected Toad, no longer in his driving gear.
Sit down there, Toad. My friends, I'm pleased to inform you that Toad has at last seen the error of his ways. He is truly sorry for his misguided conduct in the past, and he has undertaken to give up motor cars entirely and forever. I have his solemn promise to that effect. Do I not, Toad?
That is very good news.
Very good news indeed.
Toad?
No.
I knew it.
No, I'm not sorry. It was not folly at all. It was simply glorious.
You backsliding animal. Didn't you tell me just now in there?
I'd have said anything in there, but out here, I find that I'm not a bit sorry. Or repentant, really. so it's no earthly good saying I am. On the contrary, I faithfully promise that the very first motor car I see, off I will go in it.
Oh, since you won't lead to persuasion. Oh, I feared it would come to this all along. You've often asked us to come and stay with you, Toad, in this handsome house of yours. Well, now we're going to. Take him upstairs, you two, and lock him in his bedroom while we arrange matters between ourselves.
It's for your own good, Toady.
Think what fun we shall all have together when you've quite got over this.
No more regrettable incidents with the police.
And no more weeks in hospital.
Turning the key on him, they descended the stairs with the Toad shouting abuse.
Beast, you absolute beast!
Through the keyhole. Downstairs, the three friends met in conference on the situation.
Oh, it's going to be a tedious business. I've never seen Toad so determined. But he must never be left unguarded, not for an instant.
Each animal took it in turns to sleep in Toad's room at night, and they divided the day up between them. At first, the Toad was undoubtedly very trying. He would arrange bedroom chairs in rude semblance of a motor car and crouch, staring fixedly ahead, exclaiming, "Poop, poop." As time passed, this grew less frequent. But soon he grew apparently languid and depressed. One fine morning, the rat, whose turn it was on duty, spoke sternly to him.
Now, jump up, there's a good fellow, and don't lie there moping on such a fine morning as this.
Oh, dear kind rat, how little you realise my condition, and how very far I am from jumping up now, if ever. Oh, but do not trouble about me. I hate being a burden to my friends. However, I do not expect to be one much longer.
Well, I hope not too.
Ratty, I would beg you, for the last time probably, to step round to the village as quickly as possible. Even now it may be too late. And fetch the doctor.
Why? What do you want a doctor for?
No, it's the trouble. Never mind. Forget that I asked.
Oh, look here, old chap. Of course I'll fetch a doctor to you if you really think you need one. But you can hardly be as bad as all that. Let's talk about something else.
I fear, dear friend, that talk can do little in such a case as mine, or doctors either, for that matter. Still, one must grasp at the slightest straw. And while you are about it, would you mind, at the same time, asking my lawyer to step up?
A lawyer? Oh, he must be really bad.
The rat hurried from the room, not forgetting, however, to lock the door carefully behind him. Though he could not find either the badger or the mole, he thought it imperative in the circumstances that he head off to the village on his errand of mercy. As soon as he had heard the key turn in the lock, the Toad hopped lightly out of bed and watched eagerly as the rat disappeared down the carriage drive. Then, laughing heartily, he dressed in the smartest suit he could find and filled his pockets with cash before scrambling out of the window, down to the ground, and taking off in the opposite direction to the rat. It was approaching luncheon before his friends realised that he had gone.
Oh, he did it awfully well.
He did you awfully well. He's got clear away.
Meanwhile, the Toad, giddy and irresponsible, walked briskly along the high road some miles from home.
Smart piece of work, that. Brain against brute force, and brain came out on top, as it's bound to do. Poor old Ratty. My, won't he catch it when dear Badger gets back?
He strode along with his head held high till he reached a little town where a sign for the Red Lion reminded him that he had had no breakfast and was exceedingly hungry. So he marched into the inn.
Good day, sir.
And ordered the best luncheon on the menu. He was about halfway through his meal when an all too familiar sound approaching down the street set him trembling all over. Drew nearer, and the car could be heard coming to a halt. The toad could hardly contain his glee. When the owners of the motor car had taken their seats in the pub, he very calmly paid his bill at the bar and slipped silently out into the yard where the vehicle was stationed.
Well, there cannot be any harm in just looking at it.
Then,
I wonder if this sort of car starts easily.
The next moment he found he had hold of the starting handle of the car and began to turn it. Then, as if in a dream, he found himself somehow seated behind the steering wheel. He pulled the lever, and off shot the car, out through the archway and onto the high street. Further down the road, he increased the pace and was soon country. He was Toad once more. The miles were eaten up in a flash, the Toad entirely reckless of what might come.
Let me see. This ruffian, whom we observe cowering before us, has been found guilty on the clearest evidence, first, of stealing a valuable motor car, secondly, of driving to the public danger, and thirdly, of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clerk, would you tell us, please, what penalties we can impose, without, of course, giving the prisoner the benefit of the doubt, because there isn't any?
Sam would consider that stealing the motor car was the worst offence, and so it is. But cheating the police undoubtedly carries the severest penalty, and so it ought. Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, which is mild, and 3 years for the furious driving, which is lenient, and then 15 years for the cheek, which was a pretty bad sort of cheek, judging by what we've heard from the witness box, those figures tot up to 19 years.
Oh, first rate.
So we'd better make it around 20 just to be on the safe side.
An excellent suggestion. Now, prisoner, pull yourself together. It's going to be 20 years hard labour for you.
The hapless Toad was loaded with chains and dragged from the courthouse, shrieking and protesting his innocence.
No, I'm innocent, help!
He was marched through the marketplace, across the drawbridge, below the spiky portcullis, and into the old castle. Inside, he was led past the guardroom as they jeered at him, up the time-worn winding steps, until he reached the door of the grimmest dungeon at the heart of the innermost keep. There, the jailer nodded grimly as the miserable Toad entered his cell. The door clanged shut, and the rusty key creaked in the lock behind him. He was now a helpless prisoner in the stoutest, best-guarded castle in all the land. In a particularly low moment, the captive toad flung himself full length on the floor of his cell and shed bitter tears of despair.
This is the end of everything. The end of the career of Toad. Imprisoned so unjustly for stealing so handsome a motor car in such an audacious manner, and for such lurid and, dare I say, imaginative cheek bestowed upon the local constabulary. Oh, but now I must languish in this dungeon till all the people who were proud to say they knew me have forgotten my very name.
With lamentations such as these, he passed his days and nights for several weeks more, often refusing meals. Now the jailer had a daughter, a pleasant and good-hearted wench, who assisted her father in the lighter duties of his post. She was particularly fond of animals, and taking pity on the misery of the toad, one day said to her father,
"Father, I can't bear to see that poor beast so unhappy and getting so thin. You let me have the managing of him. I'll make him eat from my hand, sit up, and do all sorts of things."
Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. So she did.
"Now, cheer up, Toad. Sit up, dry your eyes, and be a sensible animal."
Still the toad wailed, kicked with his legs, and refused to be comforted. When the girl returned some hours later, she carried a tray with a cup of tea and a plate of hot buttered toast. Finally, the toad sat up, dried his eyes, sipped his tea, and munched his toast. He was soon revived and began talking freely about himself, his estate, and how important he was.
"Tell me more about Toad Hall. It sounds beautiful."
Toad Hall is an eligible, self-contained gentleman's residence.
"No, tell me something real about it."
So he told her about the boathouse and the fish pond and the old walled garden, about the stables and the hen house, the dairy and the wash house.
"Wash house?"
Yes.
"I have an aunt who is a washerwoman."
Oh, there, never mind. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen.
"Oh, do be quiet a minute, Toad. You talk too much."
Well,
As I have said, I have an aunt who is a washerwoman. She does the washing for all the prisoners in this castle.
The toad stared at her blankly.
She takes out the washing on a Monday and brings it back on a Friday. This is a Thursday. Now, you're very rich. At least you're always telling me so. And she's very poor. I think if she were properly approached, you could have come to some arrangement by which she would let you have her dress, bonnet, and so on. And you could escape the castle disguised as the official washerwoman. You're very alike in many respects, particularly about the figure.
we are not. I have a very elegant figure, for what I am.
So is my aunt, for what she is. But have it your own way, you horrid, proud, ungrateful animal, when I'm sorry for you and trying to help.
Oh, yes, that's all right. Thank you very much indeed. But look here. Surely you wouldn't have Mr. Toad of Toad Hall going about the country dressed as a washerwoman?
Then you can stop here as a toad.
Oh, good, kind, clever girl. Introduce me to your worthy aunt, if you'll be so kind, and I have no doubt that the excellent lady and I will be able to come to some arrangement.
Next evening, the girl ushered her aunt into Toad's cell, bearing this week's washing pinned up in a towel. In return for his cash, the toad received a cotton print gown, an apron, a shawl, and a rusty black bonnet.
You're the very image of her. Only I'm sure you've never looked so respectable in all your life. Now, goodbye, Toad, and good luck. Go straight down the way you came up, and if anyone says anything to you, remember you're a widow woman, quite alone in the world, with a character to lose.
He followed the girl's orders and in no time at all heard the great outer door clang behind him. He felt the fresh air on his brow and knew that he was free. Dizzy with success, he skipped towards the lights of the town and made his way to the train station, where he consulted the timetable and found that a train, bound more or less in the direction of his home, was due to leave in 15 minutes.
Oh, luck!
At the ticket office, he gave the name of the station that he knew to be nearest Toad Hall and put his fingers in search of the necessary money. But where his waistcoat pocket should have been, there was only the cotton gown. To his horror, he remembered that he had left both coat and waistcoat behind, in his cell.
Just give me that ticket, will you? And I'll send the money on tomorrow. I'm well known in these parts.
Stand away from the window, please, madam. You're obstructing the other passengers.
Baffled and full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform to where the train was standing. It was hard, he thought, to be within sight of safety and almost of home, but for the want of a few shillings. As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine, which was being oiled by its driver.
Hello, Mother. What's the trouble? You don't look particularly cheerful.
Oh, sir, I am a poor, unhappy washerwoman who has lost all her money and can't pay for a ticket. I must get home somehow tonight. Whatever shall I do?
That's a bad business. Lost your money. I got no home. I'm home. Some kids there too. Waiting for you, I dare say.
Any amount of them, and they'll be hungry and playing with matches, quarrelling and going on generally. Oh dear, oh dear.
Well, I'll tell you what. You're a washerwoman, I'm an engine driver. And if you can wash a few shirts for me when you get home and send them along, I'll give you a ride on my engine.
The Toad's misery turned to rapture as he eagerly scrambled up into the cab of the engine. When the guard waved his flag, the train pulled out of the station. As their speed increased, the Toad could see on either side real fields and trees flying past. Soon they had covered many a mile, and the Toad was already considering what he would have for supper, when he noticed that the engine driver, with a puzzled expression on his face, was leaning over the side of the engine and listening hard.
It's very strange. We're the last train running in this direction tonight, and I could sworn I heard another one following us. Yes, I can see it clearly now. There they are, gaining on us fast. Policemen in helmets, waving their truncheons, all shouting, "Stop! Stop!"
Oh, save me, sir. Dear, kind sir, and I will confess everything. I'm not the simple washerwoman I seem to be. I am the well-known and popular Mr. Toad, landed proprietor. I have just escaped, by my great daring and cleverness, from a most loathsome dungeon into which my enemies had flung me.
Now, tell the truth. What were you in prison for?
Well, nothing very much. I only borrowed a motor car while the owners were at lunch. They had no need of it at the time. I didn't mean to steal it, really. But people, especially magistrates, take such harsh views of these things.
Well, I don't hold with motor cars. For one thing, I don't hold with being told by policemen when I'm on my own engine either. So cheer up, Toad. I'll do my best and we'll see if you can beat them yet.
They piled on more coals. Shoveling furiously,
The furnace roared and sparks flew, but still their pursuers gained on them.
I'm afraid it's no good, Toad. You see, they're running light and have a better engine. There's just one thing left for us to do, and it's your only chance. A short way along ahead of us is a long tunnel. At the other side is a thick wood. Now, when we're through the tunnel, I will shut off the steam, put on the brakes as hard as I can. You must jump and hide in the wood. Just before you get to the end of the tunnel, you'll see then. Then I'll get full speed ahead and they can chase me as much as they like.
The tunnel soon appeared, just as the driver said it would. So the Toad got down onto the step of the cab and awaited the order.
Jump now!
The Toad jumped, rolled down a short embankment, and scrambled into the wood. Peering out, he saw his train pick up speed and disappear at a great pace. Then, out of the tunnel, burst the pursuing engine, with her motley crew waving their weapons, still shouting, "Stop! Stop!" His laughter was short-lived, as he came to consider how very late and dark and cold it was, and how very far he still was from home. He sought out the shelter of a hollow tree, where with branches and dead leaves he made himself as comfortable as he could, and slept soundly till morning. The Toad was called at an early hour by the bright sunlight streaming in on him. Sitting up, he rubbed his eyes first and his complaining toes next, then wondered for a moment where he was. He looked round for the familiar stone wall and little barred window, then, with a leap of the heart, remembered his escape, his flight, the pursuit, and best of all, that he was free. In high spirits, he set off through the wood, eventually finding a country lane which, in turn, became the high road. As he joined it and glanced along its length, he saw a speck that turned into a dot, then into a blob, and then into something very familiar.
Oh, this is it! This is real life again! Oh, I will hail them. My brothers of the wheel and pitch them a yarn. And with any luck, I may even end up driving back to Toad Hall in a motor car. That would be one in the eye for Badger.
He stepped confidently out into the road to hail the motor car, when suddenly he became very pale. His heart turned to water, his knees shook, and he collapsed, doubled up, in the middle of the road.
Oh!
For it was the very same motor car he had stolen out of the yard at the Red Lion on that fateful day when all his troubles began.
Oh, it's all up. It's all over now. Chains and prison again. Oh, helpless Toad. Oh, ill-fated animal.
The motor car drew nearer and nearer, till at last he heard it stop, just short of him.
Oh dear, this is very sad. Here is a poor old thing, a washerwoman, who has fainted in the road.
Perhaps she's overcome by the heat. Poor creature. Let us take her to the nearest village.
They were some way down the road before the Toad cautiously opened one eye and then the other.
Look, she's better already. The fresh air is doing her good.
Thank you kindly.
That's right. Now keep quite still and above all, don't try to talk.
I won't. Only I was thinking if I might sit on the front seat there, beside the driver, where I could get the fresh air full in my face, then I should soon be all right again.
A very sensible woman. Of course you shall.
The gentleman carefully helped the Toad into the front seat beside him, and on they went. Presently, the toad was almost himself again. He sat up, looked about, and tried to beat down the tremors, the yearnings that rose up, but it was no good.
Please, sir, I wish you would kindly let me try and drive the car for a little. I had been watching you carefully, and I should like to be able to tell my friends that once I had driven a motor car.
The driver laughed nervously, but his wife was thrilled.
Bravo! I like your spirit. Oh, darling, do let her have a try. She won't do any harm.
With some reluctance, the gentleman vacated his seat, and the toad scrambled eagerly across, seizing the steering wheel in his hands. For a moment, he politely listened to the instructions given to him by the owner and set the car in motion. Very slowly and carefully at first.
How well she does.
Fancy a washerwoman driving a motor car.
Then the toad went a little faster. Then faster still.
Be careful, washerwoman.
The rush of air in his face and the hum of the engine intoxicated Toad's weak brain.
Washerwoman, indeed! I am the Motorcar Snatcher, the prison breaker, the famous, the skillful, the entirely fearless Toad!
The wicked animal who stole our motor car.
Down with the dangerous and desperate Toad!
Perhaps in response, with a half turn of the wheel, the Toad sent the car crashing through the hedge that ran alongside the road. They found themselves flying through the air and landed with a great splash in the river. As the motor car began to sink, its human passengers escaped and swam towards the bank. A little way downstream, the Toad rose to the surface and tried to grasp the reeds and rushes that lined the water's edge, but the current was too strong.
Why, if ever I steal a motor car again!
When the river widened and slowed, the Toad saw that he was approaching a big, dark hole in the bank. With some difficulty, he drew himself up out of the water and into it. There he remained for some minutes, puffing and panting. As he sighed and stared before him, some bright, small thing shone and twinkled. A face grew up gradually around it, small, brown, with whiskers. It was the water rat.
Oh, Ratty, I've been through such times since I saw you last. Such trials, such sufferings, all so nobly borne. Then disguises and escapes. Oh, I am a smart Toad, no mistake. What do you think?
I think you'd better go off upstairs at once and take off that awful cotton rag. Clean yourself up and try to come down looking like a gentleman.
The Toad was at first inclined to stop and do some talking back. He had had quite enough being ordered about in prison. However, he caught sight of himself in the looking-glass over the hat stand and soon changed his mind. By the time he came down again, luncheon was on the table, and very glad he was to see it. While they ate, the Toad told the water rat all about his adventures, dwelling chiefly on his own cleverness, presence of mind in emergencies, and cunning in tight places. When at last he had talked himself to a standstill, there was silence for a while.
Now, Toady, I don't want to give you pain after all you've been through. But you see the weasels, stoats, and ferrets?
The wild wooders? What have they been up to?
Well, they've been and taken Toad Hall.
Taken? Oh, go on, Ratty.
When you got into that trouble of yours and disappeared from society for a time, well, it was a good deal talked about around here, naturally, but also in the wild wood. Animals took sides, as always happens. The river bankers supported you and said you'd been infamously treated. But the wild wooders said such hard things. It served you right, and it was time you were stopped. Mole and Badger defended you through thick and thin, said you'd be back again soon. So they arranged to move their things into Toad Hall and sleep there, to keep it aired and have it all ready for you when you turned up. They couldn't have known what was to happen, of course. One dark night, it was a very dark night and blowing hard too, a band of weasels, armed to the teeth, crept silently up the carriage drive to the front entrance. Simultaneously, a body of desperate ferrets advanced through the walled garden and possessed themselves of the backyard and the offices, while a company of skirmishing stoats occupied the conservatory and the billiard room. Mole and Badger were sitting by the fire in the smoking room, suspecting nothing, when those bloodthirsty villains rushed in upon them from every side. They made the best fight they could, but what was the use? The wild wooders have been living in Toad Hall ever since.
Oh, have they? I'll jolly soon see about that.
The toad strode purposefully towards the door, which opened to reveal
Badger.
Welcome home, Toad. Alas, what am I saying? Home. This is a poor homecoming.
Mole?
Fancy having you back again. We never dreamt you would turn up so soon. Why, you must have managed to escape, you clever toad.
Clever? Oh, no, I'm not really clever. I've only broken out of the strongest prison in England, that's all. Captured a railway train and escaped on it, that's all. Disguised myself and gone about the country humbugging everybody, that's all.
Oh, Toad, do be quiet, please. And don't you egg him on, Mole. Instead, please tell us what the position is and what's to be done now that Toad is back.
The position is about as bad as it can be. Badger and I have been round and round Toad Hall by night and by day. Always the same thing. Stoat sentries posted everywhere, guns poked out at us, stones thrown at us. Always an animal on the lookout. And when they see us, my, how they laugh. They're too strong for us.
However...
Oh, then it's all over. I shall enlist for a soldier and never see my ancestral home again.
Now, listen, Toady. I'm going to tell you a great secret. There is an underground passage that leads from the riverbank quite near here, right up into the middle of Toad Hall.
Oh, nonsense. I know every inch of the hall. There's nothing of the sort.
My young friend, your father, a worthy animal, was a particular friend of mine. And he told me a great deal he wouldn't have dreamt of telling you. He discovered that passage and cleaned it out, because he thought it might come in useful someday in case of trouble or danger, and he showed it to me.
Go on, Badger. How's this passage going to help us?
That very useful tunnel leads right up under the butler's pantry, next to the dining hall.
Aha! The squeaky board in the butler's pantry.
Indeed. We shall creep out quietly into the butler's pantry.
With our pistols and swords and sticks.
And rush in upon them.
And whack 'em and whack 'em and whack 'em! Yes!
Our plan is settled. So, as it is getting very late, all of you go right off to bed at once. We will make the necessary arrangements tomorrow and put our plan into action.
The next evening, when it began to grow dark, the water rat, with an air of excitement, summoned them into the parlour and proceeded to dress them for the expedition. First, there was a belt to go round each animal, with a sword on one side and a cutlass on the other, a pair of pistols, a policeman's truncheon, several sets of handcuffs, some bandages, sticking plasters, and a sandwich case.
Now then, follow me. Mole first, rat next, toad last. Now look here, Toady. Don't you chatter so much as usual, or you'll be sent back here as sure as fate.
The badger led them along by the river for a short while, and then suddenly swung himself over the edge into a hole in the riverbank. The mole and the rat followed silently. But when it came to Toad's turn, of course he managed to slip and fall into the water with a loud splash and a squeal of alarm.
Oh, the very next time you make a fool of yourself, Toad, you'll most certainly be left behind.
At last they were in the secret passage, cold, dark and narrow. The poor Toad shivered, partly from dread of what might be before them, mostly because he was wet through.
Come on, Toad.
They groped and shuffled along in the semi-darkness, with their ears pricked up and their paws on their pistols.
We ought to be pretty near underneath the hall. What a time they're having. Come on!
They hurried along the passage till it came to a full stop, and they found themselves standing under the trap door that led up into the butler's pantry.
Now, all together, on 3. 1, 2, 3!
Hoisting each other up, they found themselves with only a door between them and the banqueting hall where their enemies were carousing. The badger pushed open the door ever so slightly as the cheering subsided.
Well, I do not propose to detain you much longer. But before I resume my seat, I should like to say a few words about our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad. Good Toad. Modest Toad. Honest Toad. That is all. Cooking!
Just let me get at him.
The badger drew himself up, took a firm grip of his stick with both paws, and glanced round at his comrades.
The hour is come. Follow me.
The 4 heroes strode forth into the room. The mighty badger, his whiskers bristling, his great cutlass swooping through the air.
Right, fellas.
The mole, black and grim, brandishing his stick, shouting his war cry.
A mole! A mole!
The rat, desperate and determined, his belt bulging with weapons of every variety.
Aha!
And Toad, frenzied with rage, swollen to twice his ordinary size, leaping into the air The wildwooders broke and fled with squeals of terror, darting this way and that, anywhere to get out of reach. Up and down strode the four friends, whacking with their sticks at anything that moved. Within minutes, the room was cleared. Through the broken windows, they could see the terrified animals escaping across the lawn. When he was quite sure of victory, the badger leant on his stick, resting from his labours, and wiped his honest brow.
Mole, you are the best of fellows. Just cut along outside and look after the last of those stoat sentries. I've an idea that, thanks to you, we shan't have much trouble from them tonight.
The toad felt rather hurt that the badger didn't say pleasant things to him as he had to the mole, and tell him what a fine fellow he was, and how splendidly he had fought, for he was rather pleased with himself and the way he had gone for the chief weasel, sending him flying across the table with one blow of his stick. But when the mole soon returned to report there was not a wild wooder in sight, the toad swallowed his pride.
Oh, thank you kindly, dear Mole, for all your pains and trouble tonight.
Well, there spoke my brave toad.
They continued their evening in great joy and contentment, safe in the toad's ancestral home, won back with matchless valour, consummate strategy, and a proper handling of sticks. The following morning, the toad, who had overslept as usual, came down to breakfast disgracefully late to find the mole and the water rat sitting in wicker chairs out on the lawn, evidently telling stories of the night. The badger reclined in an armchair, deep in the morning paper. Eventually he looked up.
I'm sorry, Toad, but I'm afraid there's a heavy day's work in front of you. You see, we really ought to have a banquet to celebrate this whole affair. It's expected of you.
Delighted.
Now look here, Toad. We want you to understand clearly, once and for all, that there are to be no speeches and no songs at this banquet.
Oh, mayn't I sing them just one little song?
No, not one little song.
It's for your own good, Toady.
You know you must turn over a new leaf sooner or later. And now seems a splendid time to begin, the turning point in your career.
Henceforth I will be a very different toad. My friends, you shall never have occasion to blaspheme me again. Oh, but oh dear, this is a hard world.
Pressing his handkerchief to his face, he left the room with a heavy heart.
Oh, I feel like a brute.
Oh, I know, but the thing had to be done. This good fellow has got to live here, hold his own, and be respected.
After the most joyous, sumptuous banquet the river bankers had ever seen, he was indeed an altered toad. In due consultation with his friends, he selected a handsome gold chain and locket set with pearls, which he dispatched to the jailer's daughter.
Goodness!
With a letter to her aunt that even the badger admitted to be modest, grateful, and appreciative. The engine driver, in his turn, was properly thanked and compensated for all his pains and trouble.
Thank you kindly, sir.
And under severe compulsion from the badger, even the owner of the motor car was tracked down, and the value of the damage made good to him.
Good sport, Toad.
Sometimes, in the course of long summer evenings, the friends take a stroll together in the wild wood, now successfully tamed, and are pleased to see how respectfully they're greeted by its inhabitants. Look, there goes the great Mr. Toad, the gallant water rat, and yonder comes the famous Mr. Mole, of whom you have so often heard your father tell. And of course the wise old badger. Nobody interferes with him. All four heroes, never to be forgotten in these parts.